This video is about clay. There are different types of clay. In our art department we have air dry clay, terracotta and stoneware, but there's also porcelain available. Stoneware clay comes straight from the earth from a local company called Bennett's. We use filtered clay, which just has a smooth texture, can be used for throwing and hand building. The firing range is 1100 degrees to 1250 degrees, and the hotter that it gets, the deeper that the colour will go. Methods: pinch pot, coil, slab, throne and moulds. Stages of clay. All these stages are recyclable and could be reclaimed, which means that because none of it has been fired, we can put it into a bucket with water and it will go back to being basically like mud. The different stages that we have here is dry, slip, plastic, leather hard and dry bone. So we make our slip from dry clay, which is crumbled up bits of clay that we've rolled, and we put it into a pot and then we put water into it. These stages are not recyclable, which means that they have been fired. We fire our clay twice. We do a bisque fire and a glaze fire. Slip. Slip is clay that is mixed with water. It's very runny clay with a cream consistency, and it's used to join leather hard clay together. Plastic. This is where it's soft and workable, easy to mould and form, and most students will use clay at the plastic stage. Leather hard. This is clay which is not too soft and not fully dry. It can be easily trimmed, carved and sculpted, and it's easier to join at this stage. Bone dry. This is when it's completely dry. It's ready for its first fire. It's shrunk by between 10 and 15% and it's much lighter in colour. Now, if I didn't want any of the clay at this stage, I could just put it into a bucket of water and then I can reuse it again. Moisture level is something that's really important to consider when using clay. It refers to the amount of water within the clay body. Slip obviously has a high level, while leather hard clay has a relatively low level. Clay that is totally dry has no moisture in it, looks lighter in colour, lighter in weight, and is approximately 10 to 15% smaller in size. Wedging is a really important stage of clay. So this is the first thing that I get students to do, a technique used to wedge or squash any air pockets out of the clay. It's also known as ram's head wedging. That name comes from when you get, basically it forms and it looks like ram's head when you've wedged it. It's an important stage with working with any clay. You must check your clay for air pockets by cutting it in half and seeing if it's got any air pockets. If air pockets are found, continue wedging by putting the pieces of clay back together with some force. Smooth to rough, so don't put smooth to smooth back together because you're going to form more air pockets. And then you continue wedging until no air pockets are found. I generally get students to check their clay around 3 times. If you haven't found any air pockets by then, it should be fine. Scoring. So this is making marks or scratching into the leather hard clay to enable a successful join. Slip is applied to both scored surfaces and then pressed together a bit like glue. Joining. So you can see this image here, the student has a pinch pot and they're putting another coil around the top of it. So when joining both sides of the clay, you'll need to score it, slip, then coil, and then smooth it up and down. So score, slip, coil, smooth. So at the moment they've got a coil and they're smoothing it down and helping the join. These are various clay tools that we have in our art department. And this is the kiln. So you can see that there are some clay creatures that have been put into the kiln and they're ready for their first fire. They are bone dry and ready to go. A bisque fire. So this is the first fire. It's 900 degrees. First fire can't be recycled after this, done prior to the glaze fire. Bisque basically turns clay and transforms it into ceramics, and it changes its colour too. Now, it doesn't happen very often. Probably in the last 20 years, we've had maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 disasters in our kiln, so it's very, very uncommon, but you can see the work in here, there's obviously been several pieces with air pockets and they've exploded. So it takes out the students' work and other work around it. So it's important that you do wedge your clay. Underglaze and glaze. So underglaze must be stirred, applied in 2 even coats of the underglaze. The thicker that it goes, the more likely it will crack. Don't paint the bottom of your clay. It'll stick and fuse in the kiln during the firing process. So the underglaze is the colour and the glaze is what makes it darker and shiny. So you can see these are some examples of clay. We've got, in the first column on the left, we've got underglaze, which is the colour and the glaze applied over the top. And you can see that the colour is darker and it's shiny. In the middle column, it's just underglaze with no glaze applied. So it's got a matte finish. Sometimes students like this finish depending on what they're wanting to do. And on the final column on the right, you can see what happens if the underglaze is not actually stirred. Probably the best example is the Alice blue and the violet lilac. You can see that the colours and the pigments have not been stirred and you can't see them at all. These are some close-ups. So on the first column, you've got the red and it's quite dark, it's shiny. And on the second column, it's got a lighter colour, which is just the underglaze. So you can see that it's got an aesthetic difference. The glaze fire is 1100 degrees to 1200 degrees. The glaze is applied to the bisque-fired clay. It's the final fire, clay that is fired for the second time. High temperature melts the glaze materials to form a glass-like covering to the clay. We have pottery wheels, and this is used in senior visual art. It's used to form plastic clay on the pottery wheel. It's also known as throwing. Slabs, so this is where you can construct using wooden paddles and a rolling pin. Slabs shouldn't be too thick or thin. A pugmill, so our pugmill is wonderful because it's used to recycle clay. Water can be added to soften the clay. It's best to recycle leftover clay once you have finished with it. The pugmill must be sealed to avoid the clay inside drying out. So some tips. Design your objects in shapes or blocks, then join. Keep clay at moisture level by keeping it covered with at least one layer of plastic wrap. Clay that is too wet is useless, and clay that is too dry can also be softened with water. Always wedge any solid body of clay before you use it. Air trapped inside your finished object will explode inside and shatter your object during the firing process. Clay is a lot of fun, so give it a go.